My sister-in-law Sophia, who had just married into the family, liked to compete. She wanted to be better than me at everything. My parents saw that I had a long commute to work. They made up their minds to buy me a 200,000 yuan car. She clearly couldn't drive, but she insisted that my parents buy her a 250,000 yuan car. My parents had prepared a dowry for me. They gave me a 100 square meter apartment. She was unhappy about that immediately. She threatened not to bear me any grandchildren, and forced my parents to give her a 120 square meter apartment as well. Even when my mother went to the supermarket, she bought me a pack of 159 yuan tissue paper. She could find a bunch of problems too. My mother was forced by her to go back and buy a 299 yuan bag, just to make her look more noble, in order to let my brother live a good life. We made concessions again and again, but on the eve of my engagement, I accidentally saw Sophia betray my brother. To cover up their actions, the two of them pushed me down the stairs. When I opened my eyes again, I found that I had returned to the day before my brother's wedding. Everyone said, "Christopher got married. He will live a good life from now on. Take care of his wife and children." Grandma held Christopher's hand. In a serious tone, she said, "Christopher is getting married. This is a big family event. Grandma is especially happy." My father nodded with a smile beside him. His eyes were full of blessings for me, but inside, I felt like my world was falling apart. In my previous life, Sophia and her best friend had conspired against me. I had lost everything. I had almost lost my life. Now, I was starting all over again. I was back on the day before my brother's wedding. Unfortunately, my brother and Emily had already registered their marriage. If I could do it all over again, I would never let them get to this point. Thinking about tomorrow's wedding, I suppressed the anger in my heart, and quickly pulled out my phone. I looked up in a book for examples of brides suddenly making unreasonable demands at weddings. I asked, "Grandparents, parents, brother, if Emily causes any trouble at the wedding, what are you going to do?" This is really not me being paranoid. Last time, the wedding was in the middle of the ceremony when Emily suddenly demanded an additional 100,000 yuan in compensation. Otherwise, she refused to change her name. There were a lot of people at the wedding, and everyone was very embarrassed. My parents tried to persuade her for a long time, but she still refused. In the end, my parents had to borrow money from relatives. The wedding was barely able to go on. This incident made our family lose face in front of our relatives and friends. It also made her more reckless later. Don't be paranoid. The wedding is all arranged according to plan. Nothing will go wrong. My mother has no idea about Emily's true colors. She is still happily looking forward to tomorrow's wedding. Christopher thought for a while and said, "If she really dares to mess around, let's just not get married." The next day, the wedding went very smoothly. When it came time for the newlyweds to serve tea to their guests, Emily said to my parents, "Give me 10,000 yuan in hush money." "That's too little. I won't take it. I won't drink the tea. I won't recognize you as my parents." Emily put the teacup down heavily. She folded her arms and stared at my parents with arrogance. Back when she was at our house, she was obedient and well-behaved. She was very sweet-talking, and very filial to my parents. Who would have thought that after just a short time of being married she would turn out to be like this? She knows that my parents care a lot about face, especially on such an important occasion as a wedding. They definitely don't want anything to go wrong. Because of this, she dares to blatantly make those unreasonable demands. "Emily, didn't we already agree on a settlement of 10,000 yuan? Now you suddenly want 100,000. We can't come up with that kind of cash all of a sudden. Let's stick to the original plan. We'll pay you back after the wedding. What do you think? Don't ruin the happy atmosphere of the wedding." I've already spoken to my mother. She's still calm, but she must be feeling uncomfortable. This happened right after the wedding. How will they live together in the future? This is the modern age. Just transfer the money directly. Emily shrugged disdainfully. She handed my parents her phone. Her payment code was displayed on the screen. Now, not only did my parents look bad, the relatives and friends present also began to whisper. A bride's fee at a wedding is usually included in the red envelope, which is a symbol of happiness. But where is the bride who directly shows her payment code to ask for money? This is too unorthodox. Hearing the comments from the people around them, my father looked uncomfortable. He gave my mom a secret wink. He told her to transfer the money first. Otherwise, the wedding would be off. Emily didn't care what other people thought. Seeing that my parents had given in, she waved her phone triumphantly, waiting to receive the money. I was shaking with anger, but in order not to embarrass my brother, I had to grit my teeth and bear it. As I lowered my head, I noticed that the avatar on the QR code on the phone looked familiar. My heart suddenly tightened. Christopher quickly blocked my mother's hand as she took the phone to scan the code. His expression was serious. The fee for changing the name is $10,000. If you're willing, the wedding will go ahead as usual. If not, let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau right now. Don't get married. Hearing this, Emily's confident expression suddenly froze. The development of events completely took her by surprise. She stared with wide eyes, looking at Christopher with disbelief. Christopher, what are you talking about? I'm already standing at the altar. You're telling me to leave. She had planned everything down to the last detail. Halfway through the wedding ceremony, my parents were so determined to save face. Even if they didn't want to, they had to pay the 100,000 yuan fine. Unexpectedly, Christopher threatened to divorce her, which completely disrupted her plan. Emily panicked a little, but seeing Christopher so determined, and my parents silently supporting him, she looked at me. I shrugged, acting as if I had no power over the situation. At that moment, I kind of hoped Emily would just stop, turn around and leave our family alone. But the feeling of resentment soon came back. In my previous life, she had turned my family upside down and betrayed Christopher, pitting me against the wall. To let her off so easily was really too easy on her. Christopher, you've gone too far. If you let me go, I'll go. How can I face people in the future? Give me the money for the retraction. Isn't it also for the good of our future lives? Your family is too stingy. Marrying such a good girl as me, you're not even willing to pay 100,000 yuan. The term good girl became an excuse for her to make unreasonable demands every time. She always used her goodness to pressure us, as if she had so many good conditions. Marrying Christopher was like doing us a great favor. When she showed the payment code, my heart sank. The face on that payment code was actually my partner from a previous life, Michael. It turned out they had known each other back then. They were so close that they could transfer money from her family to his account directly. If you say there's no problem between them, who would believe it? Christopher told my parents and me to go to the banquet hall to greet the guests first. He paused for a moment, staring at Emily, and said coldly, I'll give you 5 minutes to think about it. If you don't agree, the wedding will be cancelled immediately. You decide. After he finished speaking, he was about to leave with us. But Emily grabbed his sleeve and whispered, Christopher, are you confused? If you don't earn more money now, your sister will take all the benefits in the future. It's fine if you don't help, but you're making things difficult for me. How can we live like this? Emily couldn't figure it out. Why did her parents prefer me instead of Christopher? Christopher also couldn't understand it. How could Emily calculate her family so matter-of-factly? Christopher coldly withdrew his sleeve and walked away without looking back, completely ignoring her shouts. Emily stamped her feet in anger and muttered for a while. In the end, with the patient persuasion of her parents, she reluctantly continued with the wedding proceedings. Because of this commotion, not to mention 100,000 yuan, she didn't even get the 10,000 yuan hush money she had previously agreed to. She really lost out. When it came to the toasting part, I was worried that Christopher would get drunk like last time and give Emily an opportunity. So he desperately tried to stop her from drinking. After the round of toasts was over, I took the opportunity to pull Christopher aside and whispered to him, Brother, before the banquet started, I secretly installed a few hidden cameras in your bridal room. Don't let Emily find out. I thought Christopher would definitely ask why, but he looked a little tipsy. I was racking my brains for an excuse to get away with it. But Christopher didn't ask anything. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. He gave a little laugh, reached out and rubbed my head, and just said, Got it. Aw, it was that simple. Christopher trusted me so much. It really surprised me. But after a while, I felt dizzy. My mind went blank. I had to let my mom take me home. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was so angry that I patted my head hard. Oh no. I forgot to remind Christopher. Don't sleep with Emily first. Although I'm his younger sister, it's a bit embarrassing to tell my brother this, but they will divorce sooner or later. I really don't want Christopher to be taken advantage of by her. Early the next morning, Christopher called. He said there was an urgent project at work. He had to go on a business trip. He wouldn't be back for about a month. This is the perfect opportunity. Christopher wasn't home. Emily is restless by nature. I don't believe she can stand being alone. As long as we have her under control, we can get rid of this nuisance quickly. I hope Christopher gets a divorce soon, but the mistake must not be on our side, because Christopher is on a business trip and can't accompany Emily back to her parents' house. My parents are still upset about her behavior at the wedding, so they don't care about this either. Early in the morning, I'm woken up by an urgent knock on the door. I go to open the door drowsily. You Smiths, do you know the rules? Today is my wedding return day. Christopher is not at home, so it's fine. But why don't you take this seriously? If no one answers the door, I would have thought there was no one home. The door had just opened a crack. Emily pulled it open with a flourish. She stormed in. She threw her bag on the sofa, sat down, and glared at me. I had just woken up and now I had to deal with this annoying person. What bad luck. And she had the nerve to say there was no one home. I couldn't let that go. All the grievances from my past life and all the dissatisfaction from the present all exploded at once. My temper flared. I raised my hand and slapped Emily twice. It was early in the morning. What are you doing causing trouble at my house? I lost my temper. What you did was outrageous. And you call me the troublemaker. Emily was stunned by this sudden slap. She covered her face. Her face immediately turned red. She looked at me. Her eyes were a little scared, but she still yelled back loudly. My parents heard the noise and came out. They saw Emily and I standing face to face. My father's face immediately changed. What are you doing? Seeing my father, Emily was both aggrieved and scared. Unconsciously, she toned down her arrogance a bit. Dad, how can you say I caused this? What day is it today? Have you forgotten? Yesterday I waited at home all day, and today you still haven't responded. I just wanted to ask about the preparations for the homecoming gift. Jessica just hit me. You cursed my whole family early in the morning. I'm not going to teach you a lesson. Do you think I'm going to wait until the new year? It's just a return visit. She's expecting a big show from my parents. The wedding day was already a disaster. She didn't even try to smooth things over, and she even had the nerve to come to our home and stir up trouble. She wants my parents to speak up for her. She really thinks she's a princess. My parents didn't know what to say, although they didn't approve of my hitting her, but they had never seen a daughter-in-law like Emily. Facing my father's disapproving gaze, Emily knew she had done wrong. She dared not make a scene. She turned and sat on the sofa, gently rubbing her burning face. She glanced at me with envy in her eyes. She sucked in a breath. Then she said to my parents, "The new car parked at the entrance to the community is Jessica's, isn't it? I just got married here, and you bought Jessica a new car. Have you considered how I feel? Forget it. I'll let it go for the wedding gift, but you have to buy me a car too. Don't be so biased. I really don't understand what you're thinking. Jessica will marry someone sooner or later. The money spent on her will just benefit someone else in the end. This idea is really surprising." My parents were stunned when they heard this. They couldn't speak for a long time. They didn't know how to respond. Even if I get married in the future, will I not be their daughter anymore? Why have I become a stranger? They used their savings to buy their own daughter a car. Why should they care about Emily's feelings? And here she is, complaining about unfairness. Before the wedding, my parents deliberately bought Christopher a new car. If they don't buy it, they will be biased. I looked at Emily and muttered to myself, saying such things to my parents, is she not smart enough to know how to behave? Emily's words became more and more outrageous. My mother had wanted to give her 3,000 yuan to let her prepare a gift for the groom's family. But after her antics, my mother completely lost interest. She simply kicked her out of the house. Emily jumped up and down outside the door, cursing and swearing. My parents' faces grew increasingly ugly. My mother sighed helplessly. She said with regret, "It's all my fault. I should have let Christopher spend more time with her, to get to know her better." My father had just taken out a cigarette. Before he could light it, my mother gave him a glare. He didn't dare put it down. He sniffed it first. In the end, he had to put it back embarrassedly. It's useless to say this now. The rice is already cooked. We can only rely on our son to see if he can control his wife. That's what I said. But the deep worry on my father's face couldn't be hidden. Yesterday, I just drove the car back, parked in the community. How did Emily know it was mine? In the last life, she also kept nagging because my parents bought me a new car. But this time we haven't told her about it yet. Could it be that she has been secretly observing our family? Thinking about this, my back felt cold. I didn't care if I would be misunderstood as sowing discord. I told my parents about my doubts. Parents, do you think Emily really wants to live a good life with Christopher? As a new daughter-in-law, even if she doesn't actively try to please her in-laws, she shouldn't be like this. Everything she says and does seems to be deliberately trying to upset her family-in-law. Recalling Emily's various actions, my father let out a cold breath. He realized her abnormality. My father turned back to ask my mother, "I remember introducing Christopher to someone. It was your colleague, right?" "Yes." Lao Wu mentioned his colleague's friend has a daughter. She's pretty and hardworking. He wants to introduce her to Christopher. My parents sighed at the same time. They always say that things may turn out better if they're left alone, but they're just too impatient. Seeing their furrowed brows, I hastened to reassure them. Parents, children will find their own happiness. The daughter-in-law is Christopher's. Let him worry about it himself. You've worked hard for most of your lives. You should enjoy your retirement. Don't worry about these things. To stop me from worrying, my father waved his hand. He pretended to be relaxed and said, "Children shouldn't worry about grown-up matters. Go out and play." I felt a bit helpless. I was in my 20s. My parents still treated me like a child. But I did have something important to go out and do. I had made an appointment with my cousin yesterday to meet today. She knew a lot of people. I was going to ask her for help. I'll look into Emily's case. And Christopher. He never went on a business trip the day after his wedding. I'll find an opportunity. I need to have a serious chat with him. He's definitely hiding something from me. I took my cousin's arm and told her all about Emily in one breath. After listening to me, my cousin sighed. I've lived a long life, and I've never met anyone who can be so fickle. It hasn't even been long since they got married. And one thing after another. Your family has always been known for its good temper. But she's just fine. It's fine if she doesn't cherish it. What's the point of all this trouble? If it weren't for all the annoying things in the past, I might also think that Emily just has a bad personality. But now I understand very clearly in my heart. What's the point? It's just about money. After listening to this, my cousin was full of doubts. She felt that if Emily really wanted to calculate my family's wealth, she should have played the role of a good wife and mother well. She should have made the whole family like her. Now the whole family doesn't like her. But I understand. Thinking about Emily's greedy nature in the last life, besides money, I really can't find any other reason to explain what she did. She was so reckless. She wasn't even afraid of offending the whole family. Maybe from the beginning she never wanted to live a good life with Christopher. I asked my cousin to find someone reliable to investigate Emily. Then I went home. Back home. My mother was busy in the kitchen. Emily was here again. She lay unceremoniously on the sofa. She ate fruit and watched TV. She didn't notice my mother busily going about her work in the kitchen. She didn't think to help. "Oh, our young lady has returned in her new car. She saw me come in," Emily said with a sarcastic tone. She picked at the fruit platter with her stubby fingers. She picked up a round strawberry. She stuck it straight in her mouth. Her smug expression, it suddenly ignited the anger that had been building up inside me for so long. I was all too familiar with this scene. It immediately reminded me of all the bad things that had happened to me in my previous life. I closed my eyes hard. I tried hard to restrain my impulses. I really didn't dare to say anything. I was afraid that if I lost control, I would rush up to her and slap her. With a thud, I slammed the door. I threw my bag down. I collapsed in a heap. I fell heavily onto the bed. I lay there for a while, My mood slowly improved. I stood up. I planned to go to the kitchen and help my mother with something. Unintentionally, I glanced at the dressing table. I suddenly stopped in my tracks. I turned around and took a closer look. The position of the cosmetics had obviously been moved. Someone had gone through my things. My mother had always respected my privacy. She normally didn't just go into my room. I quickly opened the jewelry box. After a careful inspection, I noticed that a bracelet was missing. On my 18th birthday, Christopher had given me a present. He didn't have a very good sense of aesthetics at the time. He chose a bracelet with a somewhat old-fashioned style. But to me, this bracelet meant a lot. Now the bracelet was gone. I immediately suspected Emily of taking it, and I became more and more certain. Emily had married into our family for the sole purpose of cheating for money, but I never thought she would be so bold as to steal from me. I was so angry that I stormed into the living room and shouted at Emily, "Give me back my bracelet." Emily was taken aback at first. She obviously hadn't expected me to notice the missing item so quickly. She looked away, but she put up a feigned defense. "What are you talking about? What bracelet?" "I have no idea," she said. She put down the fruit bowl, picked up her bag and was about to leave. I quickly reached out, grabbed her, pushed her back onto the sofa. "Don't pretend. I know you took it. Now give it back to me. I can let it go. Otherwise I'll call the police right now." Hearing our quarrel, my parents hurried over, asking what was going on. Before I could say anything, Emily started crying and yelling, "Is there any justice in this world? The Smith family is always ganging up on people. My new sister-in-law has only been here a few days, and already she's making unreasonable demands. Everyone always says that sister-in-laws are difficult. I can see what they mean now. While my husband is away, they want to bully me." "Really?" My mother has been through a lot recently with Emily. As soon as she heard her starting trouble again, he helplessly rubbed his temples. He turned to me and asked, "What did she do this time?" I asked him in return, "Why is it that I did something? Why don't you ask your precious daughter? What exactly has she done?" As soon as he came in, he gave me a hard time. And now he's accusing me of stealing. I won't let this go until I get an explanation today. This is not going to end easily. She actually went and told on me first. She thinks I can't deal with her. I immediately took out my phone and called Christopher. "Brother, my wife has taken your things. What should we do about this?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. I could almost see Christopher frowning. His face was full of impatience. "If something is lost, just call the police. I don't need to tell you that." "Okay." I'm relieved to hear that. In his previous life, Christopher was not subservient to Emily, but he was very tolerant and considerate. But this time, his attitude towards Emily was as cold as an ice cellar. I began to suspect that my brother had also been reborn, but when I thought about it carefully, I felt that something was not quite right. If Christopher had really been reborn, according to his character, he definitely would not have let Emily off so easily. I briefly asked Christopher about his situation, and hung up in a good mood. Then I was about to call the police at 110. At that moment, Emily came to her senses from the shock, and suddenly reached out and knocked my phone out of my hand. She shouted, "Jessica, are you crazy? I'm your sister-in-law. You're actually going to call the police to arrest me. You just let her harm me like this, and you don't care. My mother knows me best. She knows I would never make this up. Since I said Emily stole my things, I won't frame her falsely." I told her, "Emily, our Smith family has always had very strict family rules. We don't allow any kind of stealing. You took Jessica's things. Give them back." My mother rubbed her pounding temples. She had had more headaches recently than in the past year combined. I wanted to give Emily a chance to admit her fault, but she refused to accept it. She said, "I've already said it many times. I didn't take her things." "How many times do you want me to say it before you believe me? Your whole family is ganging up against me. I'm going back to my parents' house." Emily saw that her temper tantrum had been useless, so she started making unreasonable demands. Pretending to be aggrieved, she grabbed her bag and ran for the door. I quickly reached out and grabbed her bag. I unzipped it. Then I shook it vigorously with the opening facing down. Lipstick, tissues, keys, and other things fell all over the place with a crackling sound. Finally, with a plop, a beautiful silver bracelet fell to the ground. The three of them immediately turned their heads and stared at Emily. Their eyes were full of questions. "What is this?" Seeing this scene, Emily's face immediately changed. She snatched back her bag, grabbed the things on the ground indiscriminately, and stuffed them all back into the bag. Then, she picked up the bracelet and threw it at me angrily. "Here, you're so reluctant to part with an old bracelet. Are you short of money?" She probably still felt a little embarrassed. After shouting that sentence, she hugged the bag tightly. She didn't dare to look at my parents and me. She walked quickly with her head down. We didn't say a word for a while. My mother whispered, "What's going on?" My father sat my mother down, who was in a low mood. After thinking for a while, he said hesitantly, "Marrying such a daughter-in-law, I'm afraid we won't have peace in the future. Maybe we should persuade Christopher to get a divorce." As soon as my father finished speaking, he felt that it was inappropriate. He shook his head. His face was full of worry. Christopher had been married for less than a month and was already talking about divorce. His reputation would definitely be affected. But if they didn't divorce, Christopher and Emily would be forced to live together for decades. Christopher would never be happy. After the incident with the bracelet, I thought Emily would be quiet for a while. But after a few days, she started causing trouble again. That day, a few of us colleagues had arranged to have dinner together. We had just sat down. We hadn't even exchanged a few words. Team leader Lee received a phone call. He stood up and said, "I'll go meet a friend." We didn't think much of it at the time, but as soon as I saw the person, I froze. The friend the team leader had brought was actually Michael. He was wearing a well-fitting suit. His eyes were sharp. They looked directly at me. My heart tightened. Was this really a coincidence? Later, I discovered that Michael often did nice things for me without saying a word. That's when I realized it wasn't a coincidence. The last time, I met Michael through Emily's introduction. At first, I thought he was okay. After a while, we got together. If I hadn't seen with my own eyes what happened between him and Emily, I might have been tricked into getting married. In that case, not only would my savings be gone, I would have been dumped mercilessly in the end. This time, because Emily and I didn't get along from the start. She knew that if she introduced me to someone directly, I would definitely not be willing to accept. So she arranged for Michael to find an opportunity to approach me himself. Since we met at that dinner, Michael has been pursuing me. I have rejected him time and time again, but he just won't give up. It's really annoying. In the past half-month, I have been watching my brother's home surveillance camera every day. Maybe Emily is just too cautious. She has never brought Michael back. They probably haven't had a chance to be together yet. I haven't found any useful evidence. This day, Michael stopped me in front of the company with a big bouquet of roses. I once again rejected him rudely in front of everyone. I stared coldly at Michael. He was pretending to be deep in love. I said coldly, "Michael, don't you usually look in the mirror?" "There's no mirror, but there must be some water. Take a good look at yourself. Think about what makes you worthy of me. You're like this, and you still dare to pester me." As I walked past the stunned Michael, I gave him a disdainful glance. Michael is a person with a short temper and not much patience. Sure enough, I had only taken a few steps when I heard a clang behind me. I turned around. Michael was throwing the flowers into the trash can in a rage. He stared at my back for a few seconds. Then he turned around and walked away. Very good. I've managed to anger him. I smiled to myself. It had taken half a month of useless work. Those two would definitely be unable to sit still now. As soon as I got home, I immediately turned on the surveillance camera to check. Soon, the security door rang. Michael came in. He slammed the door shut. Seeing this, I clenched my fists in anger. Emily had actually given Michael the key to Christopher's house. Michael's face was gloomy, and casually threw the key on the shoe cabinet at the entrance. He put on his slippers and walked to the sofa and sat down. Emily heard the sound. She walked out of the bedroom. She asked in a low voice, "Why are you here? Who are you angry with?" She skillfully sat on Michael's lap. She reached out and massaged his temples. Michael closed his eyes and enjoyed it for a while. Then he opened his eyes. His gaze became extremely fierce. Jessica is really inconsiderate. I've been chasing after her for so long. I haven't even touched her hand. The hand that was massaging stopped suddenly. Emily looked at Michael with a sad face and said, "You're not really interested in her, are you? You've forgotten all about our previous plan." She not only humiliated me, she also asked when you could take revenge for me. She's jealous now. Her arrogant attitude when she was at my house is completely different. Michael laughed and patted Emily on the shoulder. He said, "You are just a jealous person. Jessica is so skinny. You have a charming figure. And you, Christopher, are handsome and rich. Don't let him get you carried away." Emily lightly patted Michael's shoulder. Pretending to be shy, she said, "Nonsense." Then she leaned into Michael's arms, whispering, "If it weren't for the fact that we need to save more money for the future, I wouldn't have to marry someone else against my will." Seeing this, I clutched my shirt corner tightly. My heart was racing. I was looking forward to hearing more secrets. Michael gently rubbed Emily's head with his face. He patted her back. Then he sighed. It seemed a little helpless. "Hold on a little longer. Wait until I get rid of Jessica. Once I get her money, we'll leave. We'll live a good life." As soon as he heard the word leave, Emily's eyes immediately lit up, but they quickly dimmed again. "Didn't you just say you haven't even touched her hand? So when will I get her money? I have many ways to make her do what I want." If she refuses to cooperate, Michael sneered at the corner of his mouth. His eyes revealed a ruthless determination to succeed. "You mean, as long as the rice is cooked, she will have to marry me obediently." The two of them made love for a while. Michael kissed Emily's forehead lightly and said, "Baby, I have to go." Emily was reluctant, and pulled Michael coquettishly, asking him to stay a little longer. Michael said helplessly, "We have to be extremely careful. We absolutely cannot let anyone find out about our relationship. Do you know how many years you get for fraudulently entering into a marriage? I don't want you to go to jail." Soon, Michael left. I was relieved. Only then did I realize that my back was soaked with cold sweat. These two people are terrifying. They will do anything to achieve their goals. I quickly saved the surveillance video. Then I called Christopher. "Brother, when will you be back?" "Just a few days." Christopher's tone concealed a suppressed anger. My back felt cold. Christopher rarely got angry, but when he does get angry, it's a sight to behold. I silently lamented for a second for the person who made him angry. Then I couldn't help but say, "Brother, as soon as you come back, divorce Emily." "Okay." He hung up. I immediately told my parents the news, because my parents didn't know what Emily had been doing behind their backs. After hearing the news, they weren't happy. Instead, they were even more worried. I quickly played the surveillance footage I had previously saved for them. After watching it, even my experienced parents were shocked. They never imagined such a thing would happen in our family. It was unbelievable. They still didn't know that there was something even more shocking to come. That night, my cousin came to see me. She looked serious and led me into her room. She handed me a file folder. It was the investigation file on Emily. My cousin nodded. I took out a few sheets of paper and a stack of photos. At this point, I hadn't noticed anything was wrong with my cousin. At first, I thought she was just shocked by the fact that Emily had cheated on her husband so soon after their wedding. But then I saw the truth about Emily and Michael's relationship. I nearly dropped my jaw. This was real. The expression on my face was exactly the same as my cousin's. We were both filled with disbelief. My cousin nodded again. "There can't be any mistake. How is this possible?" My cousin frowned, with a painful expression. "It's like she's eaten poison." She kept shaking her head, repeatedly confirming whether the information was accurate. I suddenly sat on the bed and said in surprise, "Oh my God, Emily and Michael are half-siblings." Emily was born not long ago. Her biological parents died in an accident. Her relatives didn't want to take care of another child. They felt that she was a burden. Just then, a family in the neighboring village wanted to adopt a girl, so they took Emily away. Since then, she has gone from being Sophia to Emily. This family also has a boy. His name is Michael. The family has always raised Emily as their own daughter. Unexpectedly, the two grew up together. They even had a child by accident. They were afraid to tell their family, so they had to secretly give birth to the child. In the end, they discovered that the child had intellectual problems. By the time the family found out, there was no way to change it. There was no choice. In order to earn more money to treat the child, this family moved in with us. But these people are incompetent. Seeing that Emily is pretty, they looked for opportunities everywhere. They set their sights on our family. How ridiculous. Under the guise of the child's future, they committed fraud. If Christopher hadn't been deceived into marriage, I might feel quite sorry for Emily and Michael. I would lament the cruel twists of fate. It would make one sigh helplessly. But now, it is my dearest brother who has been deceived and hurt. And in my previous life, they even caused me to lose my life. I only have deep hatred for them. After my cousin left, I handed my parents the investigation materials. The series of blows made my mother faint on the spot. She was sent to the hospital that night. Fortunately, it was only a momentary fit of anger. There was no major problem. She would be fine after a few days of rest. When Christopher returns, I'm afraid he won't be able to take it. I've been thinking about how to tell him the truth in a tactful way. Unexpectedly, he poked me on the head with a mixture of anger and laughter. You don't think I've been away for a long time. You really think I've just been on a business trip, do you? Mom, I know I've made a mistake. I've worried you about my affairs. Mom leaned against the bed. She held Christopher's hand tightly. With a choked voice, she said, Mom shouldn't have been nagging you to get married every day. In a hurry, I found someone like this for you. Son, get a divorce quickly. Christopher and I had other ideas than just getting a divorce. We wanted to put these two villains in jail, to make them pay for their actions. We gathered all the evidence. Christopher went directly to the police station to report the case, because a lot of money was involved, and the evidence was very clear. Emily and Michael were arrested by the police that same day. When they saw Christopher at the police station, Emily was furious. She shouted at him, Christopher, you're a bad guy. Marrying you was really bad luck. You disappeared the day after we got married. As soon as you came back, you called the police to arrest me. Why arrest me? I just took an old bracelet from your sister. I already returned it. What more do you want? She thought the police had arrested her because she had stolen my things. Christopher looked at Emily's fuss with an expressionless face. He said coldly, marrying for fraud. As soon as Emily heard this, she immediately stopped talking. She stared at Christopher. She looked surprised as if she had seen a ghost. She never imagined how could he know such a secret. What are you talking about? Who cheated on who? She still refused to admit her fault. But the evidence was conclusive. No amount of denial would help. Christopher took out the divorce agreement he had prepared in advance. He placed it in front of Emily and said, Sign it. No, I won't sign it. I won't get a divorce. Husband, I won't get a divorce. You let the police release me. Let's go home. I will definitely live with you properly. At that moment, Emily was completely panicked. Her whole body was shaking. She clung to Christopher's sleeve, crying and begging him. Seeing her like that, I felt a special sense of irony. In my previous life, I had also begged her and Michael to let me go. Don't take my life. But what did they say back then? Only a dead person can keep a secret. Now it was their turn to face the consequences. But they refused to admit it. They were just going to go to jail. But I really lost my life. Under the threat of a public trial in court, Christopher threatened to sue. Emily finally signed the divorce agreement reluctantly. The Civil Affairs Bureau handled it specially. They dissolved their marriage that day. Christopher felt much relieved after getting the divorce certificate. His expression also eased. My parents were waiting at the front door. They held a basin of water in their hands. As soon as he returned, they used peach branches dipped in water while chanting, "Get rid of the bad luck." Later, Emily and Michael were sentenced to 10 and 8 years in prison respectively for fraud. The court also ordered them to pay back the bride price and other expenses. A total of 8 6 million yuan. Christopher finally ended that unhappy marriage. I was particularly curious and kept asking him what had happened. At first he wouldn't say, but I kept pestering him. Finally he told me. He said, on the night before the wedding, he had a very frightening dream. In the dream, Emily and her lover Michael together pushed me off a high building. I suffered this fate because I discovered their secret. In the dream, I felt trapped by an invisible force. He was like a bystander and could only helplessly watch the tragedy unfold. No matter how hard he tried, he could not reverse the outcome that had already been set, nor could he save me. After I died, Michael discovered that Christopher was suspicious. In order to eliminate the consequences, he simply drove his car into him and killed him. I see. This must be a reflection of what Christopher and I really experienced in our previous life. Although Emily and Michael have been imprisoned in this life, I still can't let go completely. Our two siblings are alive and well. How can their imprisonment for a few years be the end of it? I spent some money. I deliberately asked their cellmates to pay more attention to them. Every time I saw pictures of them beaten and bruised, I felt a little better. But it wasn't over yet. Emily's family and Michael's family kept stonewalling on the issue of returning the bride price and outstanding debts. They even repeatedly barged into our home, causing a huge commotion. Later, I don't know whose bad idea it was. Emily's adoptive parents actually went online to broadcast it live. Crying, they said Christopher had no conscience. They got divorced soon after they got married. It made their daughter a second wife. How will they live in the future? They also paid for promotion. The heat of this incident suddenly rose. This man seems like a scumbag. He got a divorce right after getting married. Did he cheat on his wife? We need to investigate. I heard that the sister-in-law doesn't like the new sister-in-law. She forced her brother to divorce. Find a partner. Now there are a lot of conditions. Not only do they need a car and a house, they also need to be childless. And there's one more thing. They can't have a sister-in-law. Haha. This family doesn't look like nice people. Bullying a girl like that. They really deserve to be unlucky. Christopher and I were cursed on the internet. Our reputation was ruined. On every platform, our accounts were flooded with curses and insults. Our personal phones were also bombarded with harassing calls, non-stop. Even our neighbors and colleagues who knew the truth started looking at us strangely. At first, we didn't intend to involve their families in our feud with Emily and Michael, but they went too far. They wanted to use public opinion to pressure us, and they planned to renege on the deal. So don't blame us for being ruthless. I compiled the evidence of Emily and Michael's fraudulent marriage and posted it online using Christopher and my accounts. As a result, the comments on the internet were suddenly in chaos. Some people said, "This young man is really miserable. He was cheated by the two of them. His sister-in-law is also quite pitiful. Her brother was cheated. It is reasonable to advise them to get a divorce. Don't jump to conclusions. This matter is back and forth. There may be new changes. It won't reverse again." The next day, I posted the police investigation notice and the court judgment online. I directly determined the nature of the matter. This time, netizens' targets of abuse became Emily's family and Michael's family. 2 days later, seeing that the heat of the matter was slowly subsiding, I posted 2 more videos. They were scenes of the two families barging in and refusing to pay. This time, netizens understood everything. They had stirred up a storm online and incited public opinion to abuse us. They just wanted to renege on the debt. The netizens felt they had been made fools of. They were even angrier. They hurled even more vicious insults. The court forced Emily's family and Michael's family to repay the money. They had no choice. They had to repay the money as required. After that, they quietly moved away. They disappeared from our lives completely. After this incident, my parents never dared to pressure Christopher to find a wife and get married. I also benefited from this. They never mentioned setting me up on a blind date again. A few years later, Christopher married his girlfriend, whom he had been dating for 2 years. My boyfriend and I were also preparing to get engaged. The future may still have its ups and downs, but we believe that the future will definitely be very bright.